Welcome into Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Daily Faceoff Live. It's Matt Larkin here. It's Friday, January 20th. Lots to discuss after a busy slate last night on the NHL schedule. First, of course, I want to welcome my buddy, Stephen Ellis, our prospect analyst, associate editor, and also the man behind the Connor Bedard tracker, which you can find. It's a tab on dailyfaceoff.com. How goes the Bedard watch, Stephen?
Well, if you're the Montreal Canadiens, that was an interesting night last night where Florida is no longer in that kind of big opportunity there to get that first overall pick. So I think the Habs kind of want the Panthers to start sucking. But right now, if you're a Blue Jackets fan, you're probably loving it.
I agree. Okay, let's throw 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock. And let's start, Stephen, by discussing the heavyweight tilt last night between the two top Canadian teams in the NHL this season, Toronto Maple Leafs, Winnipeg Jets. If the Jets win that game, they would have been tied in the standings at 61 points each. The Leafs take it with a decisive 4-1 win. So do you feel like after this display, is Toronto Canada's best hope this season? Is it the Jets? Is it another team? What do you think, Stephen?
I think the Jets played a little better than the score kind of indicates. I know in the second period, all the high danger scoring chances at 5-5 actually went Toronto's favor, which is pretty remarkable. But I think if you look at that, Winnipeg still has Connor Hellebuck. They still got this great group up front. They got Josh Morrissey. So they've got a really good group there. I think they mostly just kind of ran into a super hot goaltender last night where Samsonov, I wrote for Leafs Nation earlier in the day. I said, this is an opportunity for him to kind of show he could be the number one. And he played like that. So, but when you look at the Leafs, I think people will overreact to their tough games. But the fact is when they're good, they're really good. And we saw last night, their stars really showed up.
It's true. And Ilya Samsonov, the really strange home road split there with both members of the goalie tandem. He's 12-0-1, 938 save percentage at home. Matt Murray, 7-4-1, 929 on the road. You have Sheldon Keefe after the game indicating that, yeah, this is kind of a thing. So I don't know if we're going to start seeing that split based on where they're playing going forward, but it's an interesting development. Also interesting seeing Auston Matthews get hot. 2 goals last night, 5 goals in his last 4 games. Maybe that little bit of load management starting to pay off. He's finding his groove. I think he's going to have a monster second half. And the Jets, of course, it's one loss. It doesn't mean everything. I think this is still a really good team. I was a little hard on them last week, but I still think they remind me a lot of the New York Rangers of last year. Very similar, a little bit elevated by elite goaltending. That still matters, right? Igor Shesterkin, Connor Hellebuck. You have that stud defenseman, Adam Fox, Josh Morrissey, a lot of star power at forward, just like the Rangers, Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, Nikolai Ehlers. So I do think the Jets are going to be a tough out, even if they're just outperforming their metrics a little bit. I would not worry about them too much. But still, it was an interesting tilt to see between these two teams. And the Leafs, I think, to me, what impressed me more even was the win earlier this week. It was an ugly game against the Florida Panthers, come from behind, and the fact that they can grind out something just in a mucky night is a sign of team toughness. So we'll see if it continues going forward. Stephen, so that was some positive news if you're a Leaf fan last night. It was an entertaining game. Some sad news. We saw Max Pacioretty. He makes it back after a week off, had a lower body injury. Before that, he'd only played in a few games coming back from the Achilles tear. And he goes down again, non-contact injury. It looked really bad. It appears to be that Achilles again. It's likely retorn. We don't have official confirmation on that yet, but it looks like this is going to be a season-ending injury for Max Pacioretty. So how hard is it for you to see that, Stephen, for a guy who just every time he gets back up, he just gets knocked back down?
Yeah, and that's been kind of like the story of his career. He was starting to find his groove as a young guy in Montreal, and then he had the incident with Zdeno Chara. And then you look at last year in Vegas, and then this year in Carolina, missing the first half. So huge bummer for a guy that was brought in to be such an important piece of this team. And I predicted the Hurricanes to win the Stanley Cup. I still think they're very capable of it, but that was also on the basis of Pacioretty coming in and providing that extra scoring they needed. And I thought he looked good, not 100% right away in the first few games, but he was going to be able to get back into the rhythm and start to stand out. And I think it's just, again, I feel so bad for him at this point. You got to wonder what's next, what's the future for him. But the fact it's injury after injury, it looked so harmless last night, and it clearly was not. So just a tough situation.
It really is. And you do wonder, did he come back too fast? The initial timeline when he had the surgery in the summer was 6 months. He comes back after 5 months. He's 34 years old. And you do have to worry, did he lose himself some money this season? Because he's a pending UFA. He's going to carry a lot of risk. He could be a massive bargain next year for whatever team picks him up. But you really have to feel for him. He still plays at a really high level. 92 games only in the past 3 seasons combined, 91 points. But I want to ask just about the Hurricanes specifically, Stephen. Do you think this could create an opportunity? Because we know that $7 million, the cap hit of Max Pacioretty, goes on LTIR, or it will be. And now that could open up a possibility for the Canes to be a player for one of the big fish. I'm talking Bo Horvat or Timo Meier. What do you think this means for Carolina's trade deadline plans?
Well, now they got to get aggressive. And again, this is a team where I'm bullish on going all out or going all in on something here. When you look at the Hurricanes, I think this is a team that should be competitive for the next couple of years, so they don't need to sacrifice pieces here to go out there and win it this time. But I think when you look at the core, they still got a lot of talent. They've done a good job in the absence of Pacioretty already this year. They're gonna have to do it again, but now they've got the opportunity here to go in there and get a good rental. And I think they're gonna be for sure making a run. They can afford to trade a couple of decent prospects. They got some solid ones kind of throughout the NCAA and in Major Junior, and so that'll be interesting to see how they handle that. They could trade their draft picks. They're going to be a contender for a long time. I'd say go for it, but don't mortgage your current roster. Don't go and hurt the pieces of that to bring in someone. Make sure that you're adding without killing your team. It's okay to trade the future because I still think they have a bright future.
Well said. And watch tomorrow. We're going to have a daily face-off roundtable on which team we think should go all in the most at the trade deadline. So, Stephen, the All-Star fan vote came in last night. So we finally got those extra selections added to each roster. You had Ilya Sorokin, Artemi Panarin, Adam Fox in the Metro, Andrei Vasilevsky, David Pastrnak, Auston Matthews in the Atlantic, Connor Hellebuck, Mikko Rantanen, Nathan McKinnon in the Central, Stuart Skinner, Leon Draisaitl, Bo Horvat in the Pacific. So now we know these full rosters. We can have the real snub discussion, okay? So I want to know, who is your number one snub, or it could be a couple. Who are you looking at that got the shaft this time?
Well, I'm going to go with Tim Stützle out of Ottawa, a guy that when you look at that 2020 draft and you look at all the talent there was, and a lot of people had him to be the top prospect, and right now he's playing like the best player from that draft, and he's going out there. He's going to be on pace for 82 points this season. That's maybe even more. I think this is a guy that should be there. At the same time, I'm also looking at Rasmus Dahlin as another guy who, like, to me, is one of the best defensemen in the league this year. Very good for me in fantasy. Two guys that probably should be in this game. But I will say before you give your picks, why do the fans care so much? People got really upset about it. And I get, like, if you're like a Habs fan or you're a Sens fan and you're tweeting up who you want in the All-Star game, you're probably not seeing other teams' picks on Twitter because you're following your own fan base. So I say you don't have to care too much. But that being said, if I were putting two guys in there, Stützle and Rasmus Dahlin have been good enough that they should be there. But again, when you have these small divisional teams, you miss out on a lot of quality talent. William Nylander is the top scorer in the Leafs. He's not there. So it just happens that way.
Yeah, very well said. I especially agree with the Dahlin logic. I want to look at Jake Ottinger in the Central, but he's not my official pick because he just got a tough draw. It's the same division as Connor Hellebuck and UC Saros. So no matter what, an elite goaltender doesn't make it, but he's been fantastic. He's taking over as that horse. I don't think he's even out of the Vezina discussion. He could still rally and win it and not even go into the All-Star game. But my main pick for this one is Kyle Connor of the Winnipeg Jets. I think he's been one of the most underrated scorers in the league for several seasons now, and he always had that pedigree first-round pick. I'll never forget a scout told one of my buddies where I used to work, he had jersey flapping speed. It stuck with me, and he really does have that game, that mad dash rush ability, goal-scoring ability. He's got 55 points in 46 games, 98-point pace, and he's tied for 11th in scoring in the NHL. He's not even going to the All-Star game. You don't have room for the number 11 scorer in the league. And this is an example, again, of that format, the roster format sort of hurting a really good player. And I just can't believe that we're not going to see Kyle Connor there because he's such a special talent.
I'll add to that. I'm congratulations to the really good players that now get a couple days off. That's probably what they would love to do. And we were talking earlier of Tyler Imchuk talking about Stuart Skinner. It's like he just had a baby, and now he's going to be in the All-Star game. I bet you he probably wanted to stay home, but cool opportunity for him.
It's true. Very important way to get some rest and recovery. Very well said. Stephen, let's talk buying some beers, as we always do on Fridays. Who are you sliding that cold one over to today? Who's your pick?
Well, he might be on some painkillers right now, so he might not be a great guy to have beer right now, but Juraj Slafkovsky, the Montreal Canadiens #1 pick from last year, a guy that was, there was a lot of pressure on him. He's #1 pick in a big market. It was kind of a surprise pick, slow preseason, slow rookie tournament, slow start to the regular season. He started to really kind of find his game heading into December, and I made the argument that maybe he shouldn't have gone to the juniors. He didn't, and now he started to struggle. I think he got something like 3 shots in like a 7 or 8 game span from the time that the juniors began to the time it ended for Slovakia. So he probably could have gone there and got that kind of chemistry and figuring things out. And instead, he's done potentially for the season of an injury. So I feel bad for him. There's a lot of pressure on him, and it's done before he can kind of find his legs. So next year, again, even more pressure.
It's funny, the Habs are giving me, even though it's different management, I get a flashback of, let's see, a few years back, they had a top 3 draft pick. It was considered a reach. They rushed that player to the NHL, and it was almost like out of spite, they wanted to prove that their pick was ready. So they kept him there. And it was, of course, Jesperi Kotkaniemi. And I wonder if it was a little bit of the same with Slafkovsky. Maybe he wasn't ready, but you want to justify taking him first overall. So you park him in the pros at the beginning of the season, and he's a little bit in over his head, but we'll see. My beer is going to go to Kirill Kaprizov of the Minnesota Wild. I just love a great hockey market having a real superstar for the first time, maybe ever. You could say maybe it was Marian Gaborik back in the day, but I don't think they've ever had a player in the tier of Kirill Kaprizov. He got gold number 100 on Thursday night. He got there in game 180 of his career. That's faster than even Auston Matthews took to get there. Only Alex Ovechkin and Patrick Laine among active players got to 100 career goals faster than Kirill Kaprizov. And if you look at that 2015 draft class, which is rapidly looking like one of the greatest of all time, he's 13th in goals among everyone picked in 2015, and he's 51st in games played. He's really making up ground quickly, and he's just such a special player. He's strong on the puck. He's creative. He's got a fun personality, at least what you get through translation, and it's just fun watching him blossom into what I think is a legitimate superstar, perennial MVP candidate. So a cold one goes to Kirill Kaprizov. It's time now, Stephen, for Icebreakers. We're bringing in our own big dog, Frank Seravalli, to talk trade targets. Okay, everybody, it's time for Icebreakers, brought to you by our friends at Montana's. I want to welcome you to his usual stomping grounds. This time he is our guest, Frank Seravalli, the DFO president of hockey content. Frank, how you doing, my friend?
I am good. Yeah, new trade targets board. 6 weeks today is trade deadline day. We're in fine form with one story every day on dailyfaceoff.com.
That's right. Frank is just grinding hard, throwing one up every single day. We really appreciate the effort. And Frank, of course, we have the new trade targets board coming later today. So I wanted to start by asking you about a name that made headlines yesterday. Matt Dumba, defenseman, Minnesota Wild, healthy scratch. Of course, he's in the top 10 on your board. So is it safe to assume this was asset management by the Wild by sitting him here? And then what's the latest on Dumba?
No, so this was not asset management by the Minnesota Wild. In fact, this was purely play-based. He did have a meeting with Coach Dean Evason and worked through some of the issues that they saw pop up in his game. Specifically on Tuesday night, I know Dumba seemed to be a little bit surprised, and I think this kind of hits him like a 2x4 in the face, because you saw the Matt Boldy extension that came down the pike earlier this week, 7 times 7, $49 million. And that essentially spells the end of Matt Dumba's tenure in Minnesota in stone. And so the big question is, will he move before the March 3rd trade deadline, or will the Minnesota Wild keep him as a sort of own rental, knowing that he's going to be walking in the summer? I think the scales have been tipped in recent days toward Dumba being on the move. Does the healthy scratch hurt his trade potential and return? Maybe, maybe not, but it would also free up some flexibility for the Minnesota Wild to go out and add at this deadline, which they already have some cap space in this exact moment in time. So Dumba would provide additional flexibility for them if they wanted to go down that path. They're not set totally yet that will be the case, but there's certainly been trade interest from some other teams.
Frank, all eyes are on Bo Horvat this year. What would you say the latest is on him?
Well, Stephen, talks have really heated up, especially in the last days since Jim Rutherford's press conference on Monday, in which he essentially spelled Bo Horvat's fate in Vancouver, the Canucks saying that they believe they've made their best offer to Bo already. That wasn't a shock to anyone that was in his camp, because they've sort of felt this from the preseason on, that they'd likely be unable to come to a new deal with the Canucks. And I believe at least 5 teams, including but not limited to the Seattle Kraken, the Carolina Hurricanes, the Boston Bruins, the Minnesota Wild, and the Detroit Red Wings, have all been teams that have reached out to the Vancouver Canucks in recent days and weeks to really gauge them on the price for Horvat. I think this has heated up in such a significant way in the last few days that it wouldn't be a shock to see Horvat, who's been the number one guy on our trade targets board the entirety of this season, to be traded before the All-Star break. So there's some real interest for Horvat, who's having a magical contract year. You see the 30 goals there, a grand slam, upper deck home run for him as he heads to free agency. May not actually make it to market, which is why so many of these teams have been interested. And you guys were just talking about Max Pacioretty and that potential season-ending injury that he's dealing with. Well, how about $7 million in cap space to be able to add someone like Bo Horvat for a team that needed a center to begin with? We knew had already talked to Vancouver, but the last time they did was when they had Pacioretty in the lineup. So if you could take Bo Horvat and add him to that team as a 2C and bump Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who was also mentioned in this show, down the lineup a little bit, man, I think that would transform the Carolina Hurricanes into what already teams many believe is a Stanley Cup contender, sort of into that next echelon, if there is one, as a true legit team to watch.
So the Horvat watch is going to be very exciting. I wanted to ask you, Frank, about a name that's been relatively under the radar, but it's one of the biggest climbers this week on your trade target board. It's going to be Jake McCabe, rugged defenseman of the Chicago Blackhawks. So what's the rationale behind the big jump for Jake McCabe?
Well, the big jump is because there's been that much interest in Jake McCabe expressed to the Blackhawks. And so they've got some other big pieces to potentially move. We know about Kane and Taves, as you said. But with McCabe, the teams that have reached out to this point include the Los Angeles Kings, the Edmonton Oilers, and the Toronto Maple Leafs, I believe. So where it gets interesting is McCabe has a 7-team no-trade list, and some people have wondered, why 7 teams? Does that mean that all 7 Canadian teams are on the no list? And I'm told that 6 of the 7 Canadian teams are on the no list, but the one that isn't is the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think they've had their eye on Jake McCabe for a while, and where it gets really exciting from a Maple Leafs perspective is if you consider that Chicago has so much cap space to go around. What if you could entice the Blackhawks with potentially a better draft pick or return to retain half on Jake McCabe, and then you'd have him for each of the next 2 seasons at a $2 million salary cap hit? It would seem to be no risk, even for a guy that has an injury profile and history. And I think McCabe, as the sort of defender type, not really an offensive type defenseman, is exactly in line with what the Leafs need. And to get him at that price on your cap for the next couple years would really seem to be a smart move.
Okay, and Frank, I wanted to ask one more for you. I know John Klingberg of the Anaheim Ducks was one of the names that you tabled early this season as someone who's likely to be dealt, because we saw the Ducks fell out of contention so quickly that it was clearly the writing was on the wall. Are you hearing any traction there for Klingberg?
No, I think it's actually been rather quiet. And I think a lot of teams have seen the dip in Klingberg's game this season. Part of that is, unavoidable with the team play that's surrounding him. And I think teams always struggle to separate, did this guy have a huge drop off, or is he just playing with such a lack of support? And Anaheim basically only really having 3 bona fide NHL defensemen on their roster at this moment in time, that I think it's impacted everyone. It's been a somewhat miserable season for Klingberg, who was hoping to, he was lingering on the market for a while. He goes to Anaheim, puts $7 million in his pocket, and is thinking, okay, I'm going to be flipped at the trade deadline. I can have a great year and cash in finally once and for all for some real security. And doesn't look like that's going to be the case. I don't think a big contract is heading his way unless he has some kind of magical playoff run. And I think to this point, the Ducks were hoping that there would be a more robust market for Klingberg, who many see as the premier all-around rental defenseman available, but I'm not even certain that's the case at this moment.
Okay, excellent insight as always, Frank. We appreciate it. We're going to let you get back to that grind now, 6 weeks out until the trade deadline. This segment was brought to you by our friends at Montana's. Want you to check out their brand new comfort food menu. They got the pot roast soup. I'm feeling that one. Buttermilk fried chicken. Yes, please. Give it a look-see at montanas.ca to find out more on their lineup of daily deals. Thanks, Frank. Hey, Steven, it's time for our AskDFO inbox question. We saw last night Michael Matheson drills Eric Staal of the Florida Panthers with that reverse hit. Matheson does get a fine, the maximum allowable under the CBA. Oh no, what a big wrist slap, $5,000. So it's established this is a dirty hit, but was a fine enough for this play?
Just given kind of the rules and everything, I'm fine with that. Get it? Fine. But I gotta say, he was, that was a brave move by Matheson to try that out. It is a dangerous hit and one that, maybe the NHL looks at maybe in a long-term situation there, but that's a play I pull off in like video games. So for him to actually try that in the game and then to see kind of how that game kind of fell apart on both ends, there was a lot of fights and people did not like Matheson on the rest of that game. But I'm fine with it given the rule set, but it is something that maybe the NHL needs to look at because it is dangerous. The forward's not expecting it.
Mm-hmm. And this play, of course, was particularly predatory, just given how far the puck was away from Matheson. So it was clear interference in this case. But even in general, it's something we know defensemen are starting to use as this defense mechanism. I remember Cale Makar talking about it to media over the summer. It was something he was kind of building into his game. And if we look at the precedent, every time we have to have a rule change in terms of something that assists players in their safety, it's got to go through that rule book competition committee. It has to be approved. So right now, as it stands in the rule book, the reverse hit is relatively legal unless it's a really cut and dry case of interference, as we saw with Matheson. So you can't do much now, but I think it's something that needs to be reconsidered in the future. Just when you factor in, it's sort of a reverse blindside. It's an unsafe play that often leaves the victim of the hit hurt. So how is that any different from something like a cross check or a slew foot or a hit from behind? If reverse hits are catching players off guard, it's threatening to their safety. I think we have to reevaluate it and maybe start to consider it a dirty play and just a penalty in general. I think it might be time. So we'll see if it's a hot button topic and discussions going forward. And if not, I'm going to try and get it out there. I'm going to table it because I think it should be. That brings us now to our daily Faceoff Pointsbet daily bet segment with Tyler Yaremchuk. How did you do last night, my friend, on that big slate?
Went 1 for 1. I missed on my shot prop parlay, but I did nail the over in that Montreal Florida game. So things came off the rails and it won me a little bit of money. So I'm not too upset about that. Quiet night tonight on a Friday in the NHL. Just 2 games, but I got to play for each of them. So let's jump into it courtesy of our friends at Pointsbet Canada. And let's start with that matchup at the top. The Sens taking on the Penguins for the second time in a week. The last time these two teams met, 9 total goals. The over-under obviously set at 6.5 like it usually is in the NHL, and I do like the over in this spot. Neither of these teams has been, great at hitting the over as of late. They've both done it in 5 of their last 10, so it's kind of a coin flip, but I like the fact that they met earlier this week. There was a lot of offense, also could be a backup plan in this game as well, potentially Forsberg versus DeSmith, and if that does end up being the goaltending duo, I am hammering the over in this one. And Colorado-Vancouver at the bottom. For some reason, Bruce Boudreau is still behind the bench in Vancouver, and while he is, I'm going to keep betting against them because I just don't think they're going to play very motivated hockey for a guy whose days are clearly numbered if you read all the reports out of Vancouver. So take that puck line. The Avs have won 3 in a row. They've covered the puck line in each of them. Plus 150 for a team that is as good as the Avs and starting to heat up the way the Avs are after their early season kind of malaise. I love it. Give me that plus 150 payout all day. And Matt, I'm chasing the juice on a Friday night. Oh, and also, Bills by $1 million this Sunday. Why not?
Why not? I like it. I like it, Tyler. Especially anything to do with the Canucks right now. I'm hammering overs on their games, as I spoke about on our Puck Poolies podcast, just because it's just fire wagon. It's slop. They just don't have any trust with the coach anymore. It's just a mess over there. So I definitely stand by that logic. Thanks, Tyler. And Steven, we're going to finish it off now with some garbage time. And I'm the garbage man today, okay? And I'm going to bring you something. I don't think this take is actually garbage, though. Here come the Florida Panthers, Steven. 6-2-1 in their past 8 games. As Alexander Barkov told me, he sort of swatted down my question after the game on Tuesday. He doesn't want to compare last season's team to this one, and it's true. There's a big difference. President's Trophy, they take apart so much of the team, kind of going backward to go forward with that Matthew Tkachuk trade. That said, I don't think it means they have to fall all the way out of the playoffs. Their luck is starting to turn. They're getting healthier. Barkov is back. Anton Lundell is back. Aaron Ekblad. And I think, even though the Panthers are far behind in the wild card race, I'd be willing to bet on them catching a team like the Pittsburgh Penguins, making the playoffs. Right now, I think they're a few points back, right? They're 2 points within the wild card, but I think Penguins have 3 games in hand, so it's not an easy road. But I'm asking you, Steven, do you agree with me that the Panthers can be the team to steal that spot?
I think so. And then I wouldn't want to mess with them in the playoffs. I think obviously goaltending's been a big issue for them this year. Maybe Alex Lyon is the answer. Not really. But he played pretty good last night against the Canadiens. You look at Tkachuk, he's having one of the best seasons of his career. Again, Barkov being healthy is huge. Brandon Montour has been fantastic on the point. He's kind of filling in an offensive role that Mackenzie Weegar couldn't do. And not having Weegar definitely has hurt this team, but I think that there's too much talent for this group to just fall apart like they are. So again, bad news for the Montreal Canadiens if this team starts to pick it up, but they've got enough talent here where we expected a bit of fall off this year, not as much as we've seen. So I think they'll start to kind of even out, and I do think they will make the playoffs.
Okay, don't sleep on the Cats. And Steven, that will do it for today's edition of Daily Faceoff Live. Thank you, Steven. Thank you, Frank Seravalli. Of course, thank you, Tyler Remchuk, and our head of production, Alex Allard. That'll be it for this week. We'll be back on Monday, as always, at noon Eastern. Until then, make sure you go to dailyfaceoff.com all weekend. We're going to have more trade deadline coverage and follow all the latest stories in and around the NHL.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.